So I've sort of stumbled into this, the center of this world of censored journalism. It was very humbling to see how much has been done long before we ran into our little project this past spring. But I'm just going to give you a quick little tour of some of the devices that I've run across and set it up for Matt to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that he's working on as well. So this is a black carbon detector. It costs about $4,000. It's a very, very good detector. And it is, oops, I have to use this. It is what Sarah Williams and a bunch of folks snuck into China during the Beijing Olympics with the Associated Press. So Associated Press photographers sort of pretended, I guess, that these things were actually pieces of camera equipment, and were able to take measurements during the Beijing Olympics about the air quality. And you'll remember the air quality was kind of a problem around in here. This circle right here, you can hardly see it, but the little yellow circle over here is the average, represents the average particulate matter in Manhattan on an afternoon. And this circle, the inner white circle here, is the average in Beijing during the Olympics. And this was one day it got this bad. So they were able to do some pretty amazing journalism with this sensor that they were able to sneak into China. And they were even able to sort of visualize this out. So this is the arena, and in the pictures of the arena, and then you can see the particulate readings on every day. And this was opening day, and this was closing day here. So they did some amazing, amazing work. And this little guy this is about a couple $100 now. This is also a black carbon detector, but we're a few years down now, a few years from the Olympics. And we're actually working with this device and the folks at the Mellman Center of Public Health up the street, also part of Columbia. And we're strapping these to the back of a bicyclist. This is a bicyclist. This is an intake tube going into his backpack, and we are actually using this couple $100 device to detect black carbon in Manhattan. We're we've done a couple test runs on this, and this is just GPS data, but basically running him around in sort of Dumbo area, and to take readings. And we've been able to figure out a good way to actually marry this data together. You've got a CO monitor, you've got your iPhone with the GPS, and we're trying to pull it all together. And we're gonna try to see if we can actually deploy a few of these $200, $300 devices around Manhattan on bikes, and see if we can chart out some of the sort of pollution zones. Are you passing through different levels of pollution as you go biking? This is actually a little XYZ accelerometer. Matt and his folks at Nebraska put these together. This is an Arduino, which you all probably know about. But for how much did this cost you, Matt?
$50.
$50-ish, right? He was able to put this together, throw it in his luggage. I don't know if you're going to talk about this, but
I'm not actually.
Okay, he threw it in his luggage on the way to Nikar, and was able to see how they handled his luggage, because it was. Here, isn't this the point in which they actually took it out of your
inspecting the bag?
Yeah, they actually took the TSA took it out of his bag to see, like, hey, what's here? And then. And this is them throwing it onto the plane, and this is the plane taxiing and taking off over here. So
I can tell you that putting a device with a bunch of wires sticking out of it is a wonderful idea when you're dealing with the TSA, and also Gitmo is lovely.
So this is like under $100, right? So the price is coming down. The ability to do some of this stuff is a little bit more in range. So we had this idea. What if, and actually Matt and I have been talking about this for a long time, at least a year or two. What if we could distribute sensors all around a neighborhood and listen to things like noise and pollution and whatever else we could do. And we kicked around some proposals for that. Everybody's like, no, you can't put stuff in our neighborhood. You'll know everything about us. And so we ran into some problems with that. But this didn't go away, this notion that we could actually get people to help us detect things in the community. And then came the cicadas. Actually, the cicadas hadn't come yet, but we were talking about this in the newsroom about the fact that the cicadas were going to be coming, and what could we do around that? And I was thinking, I don't know, I have no idea, but that would be fun. Well, it turns out that if you know the temperature 8 inches down in the soil, and you can monitor, obviously you can take the temperature of the soil, but as soon as the soil gets to 64 degrees, if there are cicadas in the area, they will come out. That's how that kind of works. My theory is that they wait to make sure it's spring. They don't want to come out and get frostbite. So 64 degrees, pretty sure that it's summertime or springtime. So I sort of thought, heck, I have this Arduino under my bed. We could probably go down to Radio Shack, get some sense, I don't know, temperature sensor. Could we build? My vision was that maybe we could build a couple, maybe a dozen of these things where you're actually sensing the temperature in the ground and transmitting it back over Wi-Fi or cell phone. And wouldn't that be cool to have like a dozen of those? Not unlike what was being done many, many years prior. But this is journalism. We certainly haven't done this. So we actually did a hackathon at WNYC, and we're able to go down, do exactly that, go down to Radio Shack, buy the parts, put it together, and we actually made a prototype, a working prototype. It cost us maybe a couple $100 with we bought many more parts than we needed, it turned out. But then we were able to create this little plan where, and this is on the site right now, where you can go out and for $80, you can buy an Arduino, a little kit, a little parts kit, and put this thing together. It's a 22-step process, but you can do it. And it's like $80. And it turns out people actually did this. They walked through the instructions. We have an amazing designer, Louise Ma, and she was able to put this together in a way that made it very easy to understand. And actually, it's 29 steps. But totally doable. I know it's doable because this is my daughter. She's 9. We did it. Having little tiny fingers really helps. Put that stuff together. We put it in the ground. We took our reading. We reported in. Pretty awesome, pretty cool. Well, it turns out that a lot of people are doing this right now. Many, many more than I could have imagined. And part of the reason why that is true is that the folks at Hack Manhattan, which is a hackerspace here in Manhattan, saw our little design here and sent us a note and said, oh, by the way, you don't have to do this for $80. You can do it for $16. Like, right? What? And yeah, sure enough, here's their design. So it's the same sort of Arduino chip, pre-programmed, and then just wired together. And we were like, wow, that's amazing. $16, this actually made it possible for us to go out and buy in bulk a bunch of parts. We already had a grant from NSF Radiolab. This is with Radiolab that we've done this. Radiolab had a grant from the National Science Foundation to do informal science education. And with part of that grant, we were able to actually go buy parts for about 200 of these kits, these guys right here. That made it totally possible to distribute them to museums, to families, mail them around. We've mailed them to journalists all over New Jersey. We've done a lot of this. And it wouldn't have been possible for us with our knowledge, but the crowd out in the world was able to design it this way. Oh, this is $16. These same guys, on their own, sent the plans for this to a company in China and got 50 of them for $60. This thing costs about $1. All right, so we've taken the price of this thing in the course, swear to God, of like 2 weeks, from a couple $100 through 80, down to 16, down to $1, $1 and change. This is amazing to me that I didn't even know this was possible, and they were able to get it in just like a week or two. And now I'm just thinking, okay, what can we do? Well, first of all, here's what we've done. These are the temperature readings. This slide is a couple weeks old now, but these are the temperature readings. We've had, to date, 1,700 temperature readings reported to us for, on our website here at wnyc.org/bugs. 1,700, like in journalism, to have the crowd participate in a way where you're getting almost 2,000 data points. And this isn't just somebody saying, oh yeah, I like that, or no, I don't like that. These are people who went out into their yards, put something in the ground, took a temperature reading, and many of them are doing it daily. To me, that's just kind of amazing. We think we have about 300 people who are doing it, and some only did it once, some have done it several times. There are some folks here, Tom is one of them, who is reporting in very often. And I'm just kind of blown away by that. We also now have, because we've become sort of Cicada Central, we have now been taking in reports of sightings, and we have almost 3,000 cicada sightings. And again, from an engagement standpoint in journalism, that's pretty awesome and amazing. So we have the hardware, the price, $1. We can actually do something for $1? That's crazy. We also have this incredibly motivated audience, right? The Radiolab public radio audience, you ask them to go do stuff, and if it's reasonable and if it's for a bigger purpose, they go out and do it, which is really, really cool. So we have the hardware, we have the price, we have the crowds. This is the thing that we don't have a lot of right now. And I think that's something I'm really interested in talking about here. And the scientists have been doing this. They've been doing their stories and finding stories and telling stories. But in journalism, we haven't been doing this. Like for investigations, for showing malfeasance, exposing things, shining lights on things. We haven't done enough of this. We don't have much of this. So that's what I think is going to be really interesting about talking about sensors this weekend. What stories can we tell? We know we can detect environmental things. We know we can do air quality issues to some degree. What else can we do? I think we're just limited right now only by our imagination. And if we can get our imaginations going, there's a lot of stories that we could actually tell. So that's my quick run through. You want to get on here with this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do that. So, I am absolutely, hopelessly, shamelessly, probably stalkerishly enamored of the Cicada project. I think it's absolutely amazing. But the thing that I want to emphasize about it is that it is going on right now. And there we go. And, pardon me while I vamp for a minute.
Do you want me to?
I had a terribly nasty feeling that was going to happen, so let's try this one more time.
As Matt's working on this, do y'all have any questions about the Cicada project or any like how this has evolved or what's not working and what is working? Questions? Yeah? Oh, good.
I've got a question. The temperature readings that you're getting from the community, are people also kind of cross-verifying those ones?
Are they cross-verifying them?
Yeah.
So this is the big issue with crowdsourced anything, right? How much can you verify? Part of the verification is just because you look at the map and can you say, oh, it's actually, here's the soil temperature at this one place. You think, yeah, maybe, but in aggregate, okay, in New Jersey, is it getting warm enough for cicadas? Yeah, in general, it looks like that. We have a couple of readings still on the map, even every week, that are like below 32 degrees, which is sort of challenging to get soil down to below 32 degrees in the summer. So there's clearly issues with the quality of the data specifically. But in aggregate, we have a sense of where we're at. So. The other interesting thing that happened was we got contacted by the National Climatological Research Center And they said, by the way, you know, we have dozens of calibrated soil monitors that are 20 centimeters down, which is basically what we're looking at. And they're all over the country looking at drought and drought conditions. And we can give you the feed for that data. It's published every day at noon. And so we actually included that on the map as sort of a reference as well. So again, another thing I never even knew about, but came through sort of this crowd feed. And that's what's interesting to me. Not only are we getting data from the crowd, but we're getting ideas about hardware, how to build things, and just systems that are out there that we didn't even know existed. So.
Speaking of that hardware knowledge, could you talk a little bit about go into a little bit more detail about that process of your community guy who you know the story.
Yeah. That guy. Wait, I don't know what you mean. What part of that would you like to know about?
I wonder if you could kind of talk through in detail the steps that happened from the person who designed the chipset and then.
Right. So okay. So in the submission process on our site, he was like, by the way, I just built this thing with parts that are, well, it makes it a lot cheaper. And we're like, what? Cool. And so we reached out to him, and I said, would you be willing to share the designs? And he said, yeah, I work, he doesn't work at, he's part of Hack Manhattan. We're really interested in getting this out there. So he actually ran some tests, sent the designs to us. We have a hardware guy. It's not his job, he just is a hobbyist at WNYC. He tried it out, and it was really great, really robust. We bought some parts, we figured out how much it would cost, and we just went for it. Our designer worked with him just over email to make a really easy step-by-step instruction on how to do that, and we put it up on the site.
And then the next step was getting the Taiwanese fan to FATSA.
Yeah, and again, it was just, you know, I haven't even seen one in my hand. He sent us a picture of it. They've got 50 of them over at Hack Manhattan. The process, you all might know this process better. But yeah, apparently if you send plans out and code, they will print them up for you and send them back to you. So we could maybe talk more about that. I don't know. It's just amazing that it was possible. Yeah, there's one person with a very strident question over. So our initial prototype that we made at the hackathon detected the soil temperature in real time. It was taking readings like every 10 seconds, which is a little ridiculous. And sent it over Wi-Fi across the room to another computer. And it turns out the cicadas have a very particular frequency range. It's right around 7,000 hertz, right? I think, yeah, and it's very high, and it's very specific in its patterns, and it turns out that you can actually detect it. We didn't have any cicadas around because they hadn't emerged, so we're not entirely sure that it would have worked, but the recordings of cicadas that we had, we're setting them off, and we were able to isolate it from crickets and other sounds. So we actually built a version that would then say, hey, cicadas. Turns out that that is really expensive. I mean, it's more expensive, and people are really good at hearing cicadas, so we can just ask them. So, are we ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry
Good.
about all that. Running with scissors. Okay. So, like I said, I'm kind of stalkerishly in love with the cicada project because it's going on right now, and what I think John's example shows us is that journalists are starting to hack at hardware, and this is a great thing. And you're seeing kind of civic-minded hardware hackers achieving things where they can start to tell stories with the data that they're able to gather and with the hardware that they're using. You're seeing code and schematic sharing on the internet, people sharing stuff. Hey, I did this thing. Hey, we did this thing. If we combine those two things together, that's kind of cool. You're seeing partnerships forming. You're seeing things like Hack Manhattan doing these kinds of things, and it's all going on right now, and it's really exciting. And it kind of feels like, I don't know, a romance maybe. I don't know who the tartan-wearing mullet guy is, but whichever camp you happen to belong in, if you're a journalist or if you're in the hacker, it's the other one. That's the one who's the mullet guy. But let me just say that I don't think any of this whole weekend, I don't think is possible without this maker movement that's kind of appeared in the last few years. I mean, I say appeared. It's been around, but it's kind of exploded recently. And a lot of that has to do with open source hardware, inexpensive hardware, tools, the kind of sharing of things on the internet, the ability to kind of share this knowledge around. It all has to do, in large part, to this maker movement. The stuff that I'm doing would go absolutely nowhere without them. So who loves you, baby? But where are we? Where are we right now? I say that everything is going on right now. We're seeing things going on right now. And this is, I should say, on the one hand, this is kind of my personal view of looking at where we are right now. This is me still trying on these kind of academic shoes where I try to take a step back and look at the world and try to quantify it. And I'm in journalism, and I've learned that you can't have a future of media discussion without at least several straw man arguments to knock down or a false dichotomy to argue about. And I think we all know that future of journalism fights are really just West Side Story. There's a lot of snapping and hand waving and jumping around. And so, well, let's get to it. What I see from my own perspective are two schools that are kind of emerging. There is a school of thought that is, we are carrying all of the sensor muscle that we will ever need. That in my hand right here is more computing power than most of us in this room had for the first 3/4 of our lives combined. That these are more sophisticated sensor platforms than a lot of the satellites that we've put into orbit as a country. And the truth is that crowd is right. This is amazing. We wanted flying cars, and what we got was the world's knowledge put in our pockets. The problem is that we are using that device to play words with friends, to Instagram our lunch, to do pretty banal things. And if you are anything like me, you zealously guard the amount of battery power that you have. There is no damn way I am spending a few percent of my precious battery, in my precious, on whatever the hell it is you want to do. I'm just selfish that way. The other crowd that I see, the other camp kind of emerging, is this kind of DIY crowd. This let's build it ourselves. Let's get some parts. Let's get some boards, some chips. Let's do some programming. Let's wire this thing up. And the great part about this is that, yeah, man, it's DIY. You get to solder some stuff. There's somebody here with the air quality egg. Where are you? You're not here yet. Okay. I have to apologize to that person because I basically learned how to solder putting air quality eggs together, which means that I burn the crap out of my hands for pretty much an entire weekend. And I'm sure that those two eggs that I put together did not work at all, so I should apologize. But yeah, you get to solder stuff. The problem, if you're a journalist, you're not good at soldering stuff. You're going to burn the crap out of your hands, just like that. And I said this the other day, that the problem with DIY sensors is that when it breaks, there's just Y. That's it. It's just you. So these are these kind of schools of kind of philosophy that I see emerging. I don't honestly know, I haven't thought carefully about how I feel about this kind of two schools of thought. Oh wait, there's a big pile of shit on the screen. Maybe I have thought about how I feel about this. It is a completely false dichotomy. There are ways to meld these things. There are pros and cons to each. It's really just dependent on what you want to do. So what can we do right now? We're here at a Sensor Journalism Weekend. What can we do with this stuff? So I don't want to talk up here about boards and how do you get electricity to this thing and what current and all of that stuff. I want to talk about more kind of general philosophical ideas and let the ideas for the hardware that would be involved to do that kind of fill into your brains. The thing that excites me about sensors and sensor journalism is that we get to go outside. I've been doing a lot of programming and web app development and data journalism the last number of years, and I'm pretty pasty pale because I don't get to go outside. There was a point when I was working at home and I was a news app developer, and I walked outside and my eyes just freaked out because there was this glowing thing in the sky and I had no idea what it was, but I instinctively got down and started worshiping it. We get to go outside, we get to go out into the world. There's way more world out there than there is on your laptop. So hey, outside, awesome, let's do that. I like to think of sensors as kind of our senses, but at scale. And I use the word scale in a lot of different ways. And I think it's both, you can talk about temporal scale, you can talk about geographic scale, you can talk about these things, but there's two scales that I think are worth thinking about in here, particularly on the journalistic side. And that's, we can make news personal. I had an old boss in St. Pete who was, you called central casting for crusty, foul-mouthed editor, and he would walk out. He had a particular view of the weather, and it could be basically expressed as a very simple algorithm, which is it raining on my lawn? If it is, I care. If it is not, I could not care less. That's the only thing he wanted to know. Is it raining on my lawn? Is my lawn getting water? Don't care otherwise. I'm from the Midwest. Weather is a contact sport. We look at the weather for hundreds of miles around because we're interested in it. So to run into this man who only cared about his little plot of land was weird to me. But I came to realize he's actually probably more like most people than I am. And that we are, as a species, a very selfish lot. And we like to know things about where we are, about where we live, about where we stand at any given moment. Sensors, I think, and I'll show you an example here in a second if you're wondering what the hell that thing is. Sensors, I believe, give us the opportunity to enlist people in a way that feeds into this selfishness. That we can tell them about something exactly where they are that they would be interested in. And the deal is, if you do that, you give us back information and we make news communal. One person's self-interested data, I'll be charitable and call it interesting, but it's not that exciting. Hundreds or thousands of people's self-interested data, now we've got something. And if each one of them can use their own selfish interests to kind of power into this communal idea, now we've really got something. And they'll adopt that sensor and they'll take care of it. And this issue of deployment becomes much easier because every sensor's got their own little person to watch it. So that's what I think we can do now. I think we can begin to harness these kind of selfish interests to feed into some kind of communal idea of news on a number of given topics, and we'll talk about those a lot this weekend. But what I think we're going to be able to do in the very near future, something we're working on now, are sensors that fly, of where journalists are able to get into. I should just kill the volume here. That's really annoying. We brought this with us, by the way. I'm here to tell you, the guy flying it right there is actually standing right over there. That's Ben Kramer. I am the asshole because we talked about bringing the quad, and I said, oh, come on, man, we're not going to drag that thing all the way across this country. Ben insisted that we do it, so when we fly it around later, thank Ben. So we are going to very soon enter an era where damn near anyone who has a credit card and some time can have their own semi-autonomous flying machine for not a lot of money and for not a lot of skill, to be honest with you, because if I can fly it, not a lot of skill is involved. We will be able to mount sensors to these things. We will be able to gather information. If you think sensors open up all kinds of legal and ethical issues, wait until you fly that sucker around. There are humongous capital Q questions about using drones for anything, let alone journalism, that have to be resolved between now and when we can do this. We are years away from this. The FAA, by mandate of Congress, isn't supposed to have rules in place to do this until September of 2015. The FAA has had a year to begin implementing this. They are a year behind in implementing this. I want you to wrap your head around that for a moment. So it's at least 2016. It's probably going to be later than that. My prediction is that as soon as the FAA promulgates these rules, everybody and their brother is going to get sued. And it's going to be a number of years after that before the courts figure this out. I believe we're up to 43 states that are now in the business of trying to regulate drones within their states. Most of those laws have to do with law enforcement and getting a warrant in order to use them. Some states outright ban them or are attempting to outright ban them. The most aggressive that has passed so far was in Texas, where they basically made it a crime to take a photograph of private property from a flying device. There are so many exemptions within that law that the prosecuting attorneys organizations in the state have basically thrown their hands up and say, we can't even figure out what this means. So there's a lot of kind of sturm and drang going on about drones right now. But let me kind of tickle your imagination here a little bit with what could we do with sensors and drones and all these things in the very near future. So my home, the great state of Nebraska, last year went through the worst drought since the droughts of the Dust Bowl of the Great Depression. In fact, and by a lot of quantitative measures, it was worse than the Dust Bowl droughts of the Great Depression. The only thing that it didn't include was wiping out essentially private agriculture in the state, which it did in the Dust Bowl more or less. This is a picture of the Platte River, a river that runs through central Nebraska. This photo is actually taken from a UAV. We partnered with a lab on campus in computer science and engineering. We went out, this is near a farming community of Duncan, Nebraska, which is my wife's hometown. We flew, this is about 380 feet. We just aimed the camera down the river and took a picture. That's it. If this were in Texas, we'd be in jail right now. But we're not. Good thing. Last summer, the joke of the Platte River is that it's a mile wide and an inch deep. So it's not unheard of for it to go pretty dry in the summer if there's a long span without rain. But it went dry from the beginning of June through September, because last year Nebraska got 9.5 inches of rain all year. We normally get in the high 20s. So we were able to go out with a UAV and we did a story. We kind of did a proof of concept drone journalism story on this drought by just going up and flying around and looking at this dry river. Well, we got to thinking about that kind of over the winter and into the spring about how could, that story is huge. Drought is a huge story. It's hard to imagine the scale of it when it's as large as it was last year. So how could we make drought a personal story? And so we started fiddling with the idea of, could we build a drought sensor that would sit at your house and tell you what the conditions were at your house? So this is our prototype. It's just an Arduino. It's a wireless shield in there. And the underneath here, protected from wind and rain, is a temperature and humidity sensor. And these wires coming out here, they're just two number 16 galvanized nails. No more sophisticated than that. What we do is we run a current through there. Wet soil conducts electricity, dry soil doesn't. And the amount of electricity that we can conduct through there tells us how wet or how dry the soil is. So we set out to build this thing, and over the last few weeks, we've finally got one built, we've got one deployed, and all of the lessons learned, we're learning the hard way. Power is a significant issue. We've been able to keep it dry and fine, and what probably the most significant lesson that we've learned here is that God is cruel and does not like us. We spent weeks and weeks building a prototype drought sensor. We put it in my yard to measure how dry my yard is. Over the next week, we proceeded to get 4.5 inches of rain. Half of the rain that we got all of last year. And actually, to further show you how screwed up this all is, here is the live data feed from my backyard. We have it pushing out to a cloud service called Xively, which was recently named Cosm, which before that was called Patchabay. Nothing says your startup is kicking ass like changing names 3 times in a year. But we are able to push data to the cloud every few minutes, and it visualizes it. I'm gonna need to get directions to the nearest Tiffany's because I had to wake my wife up this morning because sometime in the night the batteries died, and it being an hour behind, I had to call her at about 7:30 this morning and go, hey, could you go swap the batteries out for us real quick? So I'm not Mr. Popularity right now, but there's the humidity of my backyard. You can see when the sensor woke back up. Soil moisture at 99%. Like I said, we got 4.5 inches of rain in the last week. My yard, if you go walking in it right now, is squish, 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 squish. It is saturated beyond belief. And temperature. We think deploying this at scale might be a really interesting way to personalize drought. There is no end of data about drought, particularly in an agricultural state like Nebraska, but it's really hard to connect that to an individual or to a community. It's hard to make that data scale down. And this is where I think sensor journalism has a real opportunity, is to bring these kind of massive events down to that really personal scale. But to try to push this forward a little bit, what could we do, and what if we had time and laws were a little different, what could we do? Well, the sensors are wireless right now, but what if you were in a place with no Wi-Fi? Like, this works because it's in my backyard. What if I wanted to go stick it out in the middle of a field somewhere, or in a park somewhere? Well, I could use my UAVs to go fly out and just gather that data, store it on a card, and come back. Honestly, right now, undergrads are probably cheaper, but this is definitely cooler. They're easy to place in urban settings. But one thing that we've talked about with our friends in computer science is, what do we do when it's hard to reach? What do we do when it would just take hours or days to get somewhere? Could we put these sensors on a UAV and get them there? The example that I roll over in my brain is the nuclear meltdown at Fukushima. Could we have taken a large UAV with some range, because I don't want to be anywhere close to that sucker, and fly a radiological sensor out there and gather data independent of the government and find out exactly how much radiation was being released from that? I believe we will indeed be able to do that, and in some respects it was done in Japan. It just wasn't done by journalists. We're reaching a point where journalists will be able to do this. But what if we need other data like in multiple locations? You saw some of the examples before of the pond and things like that. I'm involved in a project right now that takes a UAV, and we have built, it's essentially a vacuum with some vials. And we'll be able to autonomously gather water sampling data. We'll be able to take water samples at given spots in a given body of water autonomously. And it will bring them back, and we haven't figured out what we're going to do at that point, but we've got the actual sampler working. There might need to be just a human being there to pull the samples out and go to town, but we're working on that. In the near future, in the very near future, we in this room, not just well-funded scientists, not just the military, not just the government, will be able to use drones, UAVs, UASs, whatever the hell you want to call them, to gather data for us. That we are essentially building robotic appendages of our reporter selves. Now, they may be at scale, where we involve lots of people, or they may be like the quad that we'll get out and fly later on, where it's just one robot, one journalist, one thing. But this, like I said, this all kind of owes to this maker movement. These tools are coming down. They're coming down in price, they're coming down in complexity, they're coming down in availability to where we can do these things. And I'm glad that tomorrow is going to be talking about law and ethics, because that's one place that is not going to keep pace with technology. Technology is racing way out ahead on this stuff. The law can't keep up, our ethics can't keep up, and we need to jump out ahead on these things. So, finishing up, this near field future, this is for me, this feels like the Wild West. It's wide open. The only kind of limitations right now are budget and creativity. And those two things are pretty relatable. So the creativity part, I think, as John said before, is the really important thing. Like, there is stuff on the internet somewhere. There's somebody who's thought about this to build the hardware. The hardware almost certainly exists. But what do we do with it? How do we tell stories with it? How do we reach people with it? How do we do journalism with it? Ideas welcome. Thank you.